he sits in the audience, and I'm sort of making this speech in front of him. Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here. Thank you all. I think what Dr. Abid Suleri said this morning, he said that we've sacrificed our Saturday being here. I think sacrificing the Saturday was very, worth it. And I've learned tremendous amount of things. We don't hear much about climate finance at the Supreme Court, and this intersection or this energetic exercise has been absolutely wonderful, and I hope that we can take this dialogue and this exercise into our Federal Judicial Academy also, so more of our judges understand. Let me also tell you that we're passing through a season of sacrifices at the Supreme Court also, but these sacrifices, I tell you, will make this country stronger tomorrow. Interesting comment. I mean, I know that our phones are bugged in this country, but never thought that PowerPoint presentations are also bugged now. Moving on, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to share with you how the justice sector or the judiciary is looking at climate finance. You see. And we call it, what you call climate finance, I would call it climate finance justice. That's our area now, and that's how we look at this entire scope. So, climate finance has not only become one of the most pressing issues of our time, but also one that demands an urgent attention and creative solution. We already know that Supreme Court, as well as the judiciary, and the High Court itself, has come up with some exciting jurisprudence in climate justice, and that has had global recognition. But somehow, climate finance is an area we haven't really dabbled in. And I think today's exercise and my sitting in through this conversation that took place has been hugely beneficial for me personally, and I think that will get translated into jurisprudence eventually. So, in an era where climate change presents unparalleled challenges to humanity, it is essential to understand how financial support dedicated to climate action can foster resilience, especially for countries whose primary approach is adaptation. So, we all understand that the primary goal of climate finance is to facilitate the transition to a low carbon and climate resilient global economy. It encompasses funding for both mitigation, which involves reducing or preventing greenhouse gas emissions, and adaptation, which involves building resilience to the impacts of climate change. That applies to us. For a country like Pakistan, with primary focus on adaptation, climate finance becomes a lifeline to strengthen areas like infrastructure, agriculture, water management, health sector, displacement, migration, economic inequality, disaster resilience, and the list goes on. For Pakistan, climate finance is not a choice, but a survival strategy, and we need to understand that. In a sense, when climate activist Greta Thunberg said that our house is on fire, I think climate finance is that water that we need to put that fire out with. So the importance of climate change, climate finance to adaptation in particular is for nations like us with limited capacity to mitigate emissions, but a pressing need to adapt to rising sea levels, extreme weather, and shifting agricultural patterns. We need to understand that climate finance mechanism is actually our lifeline. These funds help secure communities, preserve ecosystems, and protect livelihoods. However, for climate finance to be truly effective, it must be mobilized on an unprecedented scale and be accessible in a timely manner to those who need it the most. That would be the objective. It also requires dedicated judicial attention to ensure the funds reach their intended goals and protect the rights of communities involved. Climate finance in countries that urgently require adaptation to climate change is fundamentally a human rights issue. And I think climate finance in Pakistan is perhaps the topmost human rights issue. Climate change is our greatest existential threat that Pakistan is passing through. And I am quite sure that's how we're looking at the Supreme Court. We look at it as a human rights issue, and that's the lens we're going to look at this issue, whatever matter comes before us. Surprisingly, nothing has come before us relating to climate finance as yet, but I'll just explain some of the public interest matters that are with us currently. So in regions vulnerable to climate impacts where rising temperatures, sea level increases, and extreme weather events threaten basic rights like access to food, water, health and shelter, adequate financing for adaptation is essential to preserving human dignity and human survival. So that is how important climate finance is. I mean, while I heard people talk about climate finance and how do we do structuring climate finance, in our world of justice, we look at it as a serious human rights issue, an issue that affects my fundamental rights to dignity, which is an unnegotiable fundamental right under our Constitution. By framing adaptation finance as a human rights imperative, courts can ensure that governments and international actors uphold their responsibilities to provide vulnerable populations with the resource needed for resilience, ensuring justice and equality in the global response to climate change. Loss and damage is another dimension to my mind, and I'm sure that's how the understanding is to climate finance. We look at climate finance as an immediate interjection or injection into adaptive measures, but loss and damage and attending to loss and damage would also entail climate finance, even though loss and damage is an irreversible event where things have happened, while adaptation that we're attending to is something that currently goes on. So loss and damage also is part and parcel of this issue. Let me just tell you that the judiciary would operate in a regulatory framework. We have the Constitution, we have the fundamental rights, and we need to have a regulatory framework in which we operate. So in this case, as we see that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, along with the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, established that nations with greater financial capacity and historical contributions to climate change have a duty to provide financial assistance to countries that are less endowed and more vulnerable to climate impacts. This is the global framework from where we draw our right to this money that must come to Pakistan and this finance that must come to Pakistan. This framework is not merely an expression of international goodwill. It reflects a foundation of human rights obligation. And that is how we need to articulate it here or in any international forum, that this is a human rights obligation. Climate finance is essential to enable developing nations to protect their people from the devastating consequences of climate change, safeguarding rights to life, health, food, water, and shelter. And we must not forget our floods in the year 2022 and the 30 billion bill that is outstanding, and the world is looking at us, and we're looking at the world. There we are. And unless we agitate this matter as a human rights issue, there is no way we're going to get past this funding issue internationally. By viewing this commitment through a human rights lens, courts can reinforce the idea that climate finance is not optional, but a binding duty of justice, equity, and accountability. Courts, as protectors of rights, can hold states to these commitments, ensuring that financial support flows to those who need it most, translating international agreements into enforceable rights for communities facing gravest climate threats. This is a lot of material for future public interest litigation. This is also a lot of material for your arguments out there when you go out to COP or wherever. Let me just also come to our domestic legal framework, and you'll be surprised and perhaps saddened also. We have Pakistan Climate Change Act 2017, and it talks about Climate Change Authority, which is the apex body which will run this show in the country. The entire climate change debate is centered around the Climate Change Authority. Then it also provides for Section 8 of the law provides that the functions of the Climate Change Authority would be to prepare suitable adaptation mitigation projects for submissions to international and local institutions for funding, including Clean Development Mechanism, Global Fund, Environmental Facility, Green Climate Fund, and Adaptation Fund. But sadly, there is no authority in the country. 2017 is the law, and we are in 2024, there is no authority. A public interest petition comes to the Supreme Court with this prayer, and we ask them, what have you done so far? And they have no answer. While our legislature is really working overnight, as you know, they haven't really come up with anything on this front. So the idea was, we said, what have you done? I mean, you produce notifications and you come up with all sorts of things overnight. How come you've not come up with authority? So they went back and they said, you're coming up with authority. They did come up with a notification for the court, but that wasn't sufficient. The case is now fixed to November later on, and we see, so there is no authority to start with. What to talk about anything else? We also asked them that under the law, there is a Pakistan Climate Change Fund established in 2017, says the law. There isn't anything. There is no authority what to talk about the Climate Change Fund. So the court has now directed them to please respond to what you have done. The court also asked in the hearing last time that in the recent budget that you've announced, in the recent budget, have you earmarked any money for climate? And there was no response to that. I fail to understand as a judge also that what would be more important, an area for allocation in the budget, if you do not allocate anything for climate change in this country, which is severely hit by climate change. So that was shocking, and well, the government assured us that in future we will be having budgets and all that. So what I wanted to tell you is a reality check. The 2017 Act is there, no authority yet, no Climate Change Fund Act, not a single penny coming into the Climate Change Fund budget in the recent budget. So the government needs to wake up to more serious issues rather than other issues that they're attending to. So moving on, so the critical question before us is whether the existing regulatory framework adequately incentivizes climate finance. And I've been hearing this, the other speakers also. I think there is no regulatory framework. So we can't operate in a vacuum. I can't just take fundamental rights and start, moving in on things. There has to be a proper regulatory framework, and our legislature, the slightly overexcited legislature, needs to now do something about this also. And they need to come up with regulatory framework to deal with this. Unfortunately, in our country, climate finance lacks a robust and targeted regulatory framework. This gap poses risks to a timely project implementation and limits the confidence of investors in the security of climate-related investments. So now coming to the fact that, well, much depends on the legislature and the executive to come up with that regulatory framework, and they need to understand that this is a human rights issue, and they need to urgently come up with a regulatory framework. What we can do in the judiciary, if everything is put in place, we understand it, and the judiciary may be prepared in advance for it already. The judiciary's role in this arena can be transformative by providing a system that resolves climate finance disputes swiftly and fairly. That's what we can do. If there is going to be finance, if there's going to be climate finance coming into Pakistan, there will be disputes. So Pakistan's judiciary is saying, we're ready to provide you with a wonderful, robust dispute settlement system. And I'll just share that with you. To this end, we must consider creating specialized climate finance dispute mechanisms. So we are ready. There is no regulatory framework to do this. So number one, how about, and that goes very well with the IPA and the work they've done already, is the climate alternative dispute resolution. Why can't we have a climate ADR system and mediation system which would deal with all of these climate issues? These methods offer a more informal approach and can be invaluable in resolving conflicts quickly and cost effectively, especially in multi-stakeholder projects. We need to move on to climate arbitration. Dedicated arbitration frameworks tailored to climate finance disputes can provide flexibility, efficiency in cases where the stakes are high and the time is of the essence. Then we can also come up with commercial courts or climate courts, you see. And we've talked about this elsewhere also. And commercial courts is something that the world has. I mean, majority of the jurisdictions, their topmost priority is having a commercial court. They think if you can't deal with the economy first as a top priority, there is nothing else that you can deal with. So if you have commercial courts, the best place to house climate debate or climate issues is within the commercial courts, because it's the businesses that get affected more than anything else through climate change. So we need to really seriously consider coming up with our commercial courts with a space within the commercial courts for climate issues. These issues will come. Actually, things are not being marketed properly. As Ali Shah said, there is billions of rupees of climate finance gone into solar issues. I'm sure there are disputes related to that also. Now, where are they going? They're just going to regular banking stream. We need to bring them into these commercial courts, get them sorted, move on, so that there's a quick and expeditious way of dealing with climate finance, so that we open ways and pathways for others to come in. That is something we can do. The other idea, which is very important, and this has been bugging me for a long time, and I just want to place it on the record, is that it is high time that we think of an international climate court. We can't do it without that. I can't get $30 billion from the world just sitting here in my Supreme Court. I can't. I have no jurisdiction to tell any other country to dish out money for us. So the ICJ model needs to now be replicated and taken on to the International Climate Court concept. So looking beyond national borders, we must ask ourselves whether an international climate court could play a role in safeguarding global climate finance. I'm sure this is the need of the developing countries, countries who are suffering. The world that is creating this problem will not be really interested in having this court, so this push has to come from us. Global finance, particularly when it comes to issues of loss and damage in particular. Climate impacts are borderless, and funding to address them should reflect the responsibility and capacity of all nations in line with the principles outlined by UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. Such a court, potentially modeled after the International Court of Justice, could address cases of non-compliance with international climate finance commitments, providing a venue for nations and vulnerable communities to seek redress and ensuring that commitments under global frameworks are honored. And I quote an activist from India, Vandana Shiva, who said that the earth is not a commodity to be exploited. The earth is not a commodity to be exploited, it is a community to which we all belong. So it is that sense that has to prevail, and we need to move forward in that. So some of the closing thoughts are, in conclusion, that climate finance is not merely a question of economic policy, but a matter of survival and justice. That's how serious it is. The judiciary, both nationally and internationally, has an unprecedented role in ensuring these funds are managed, protected, and implemented to meet the urgent needs of vulnerable nations and communities. By establishing climate ADR, arbitration, and specialized courts, and by supporting the creation of an international climate court, we can forge a path towards a more just and resilient world grounded in the principles of fairness and accountability. So let us work together, hopefully this entire team here, to create a future where climate finance not only meets the demands of adaptation, but also upholds the fundamental rights of those affected by climate change. The judiciary, through its protection and facilitation of climate finance, can indeed be an ally to... They bugged me, is it? I knew they had to do it. So last line. The judiciary, through its protection and facilitation of climate finance, can indeed be an ally to both people and the planet in this crucial endeavor. Thank you very much.